Obviously, North America has now kicked off with their raiding. People are following that. I'm not sure why at the moment, because I don't think anyone of note is not going to be doing stuff just yet. They're going to be getting ready to do their like dozen split runs. So I think we've still got to go for those ourselves. I have been reading again, like the Fat Boss guys that they did on Wowhead, trying to get things into my head. But the problem is, when I haven't done it, the abilities just meld together. Like I'll read an ability, and it might be an ability that in reality is really easy to deal with, and you don't need to read up on it. And I'm using brain space trying to hold on to that. And then another ability that's actually quite important, maybe doesn't look as important in a guide, and so you gloss over that one and go, yeah, I'm sure I'll be fine with that. And actually then you wish you'd sort of remembered that a little bit better. So I don't know how everyone here is sort of planning for that. I am just hoping that we'll sort of be able to get away with it. We will be able to get away with it less than we did in previous raids, because we are doing split runs this time. We're not doing it to the point where we're going, yeah, we're going to split run all the boss, because we don't insist on alts and stuff like that, and we haven't done PTR testing. So we're just going to do it as far as seems sensible, while still giving us enough time to definitely kill all the bosses on both modes on our mains. But like I remember back to when we did Odin, when Trial of Valor first came up, we did the heroic and normal Odin. And we had people in the last phase dropping like the tornadoes right at his feet. And we got away with that then because we were all mains. That's the sort of thing I think that's going to trip us up. I think, people are still going to do that, DPS whores. And, then it'll be like, oh, we can't do it, and blame the alts. Oh, we can't do this with alts. So we'll have to go for mains, when it actually might just be something simple. As if people actually try and do the mechanics, we might be able to get a lot further. How many 110s do I have? Oh dear. Let's have a think. So I've got my Paladin. I've got my Death Knight. Demon Hunter. Hunter. Warlock. Monk. So I've got 6 at the moment. With sort of slowly going up. The others will be there eventually. Air conditioned Premier in room. Yes, I don't have air conditioning. Also at work, my particular lab is like, I had students really moaning yesterday, the younger ones, because it's fairly warm everywhere, but my lab gets particularly warm. And I try and employ all the tricks because it's like windows everywhere. There's window. I have hardly any. I don't get to put displays up in my room because it's just windows. Now I employ the tricks, which is in the morning when the sun's on one side. I try and shut the blinds and the windows there and open the blinds and the windows on the other side, and then at lunchtime swap over. That, in theory, should keep it cooler, but it's just seems to have minimal effect. It's just warm, and when it's going to be warm and humid as well. So yeah, it's not particularly pleasant in my lab. It's nice in winter though, because it's nice and warm, sort of. But anyway, so yes, the other thing as well, I suppose, which people are talking, but ice next to the windows. The ice isn't lasting very long at the moment. I've been putting ice in my drinks. I haven't brought any ice up here, but when I was downstairs making my tea, I have been, well, all this week in fact, I've been putting ice in my drinks, and the ice is not lasting as long as the drink. So when I've got to the pint glass, not little glasses, pint glass, not like this thing, but yeah, when I've got to the end of the drink, the ice is actually all melted. I've been putting a lot of ice in as well. So it's been going very, very quickly. I'm certainly not going to waste ice in my window. I need it for my drinks. But it is quite incredible. I've got all the windows open. It is okay at the moment. It's okay. But that's about it. But anyway, should we get on to World of Warcraft related type chat? So again, we'll throw it out in terms of what people want to talk about. I suppose the raiding that's coming up, the class tuning that, again, remember, is going to be coming up. I know some people would have been less than impressed with the minor amount of tuning that was announced on Monday, which still hasn't, unless you're in North America, been implemented yet. That's coming with the reset. But there will be another set of tuning next week, of course, once they get all their Tomb of Sargeras data. What legendaries am I planning to upgrade first? Is a good question. I don't actually know, because I am collecting caches at the moment to open up tomorrow. So if I get one of the new legendaries, then that'll be very, because it depends which legendaries I intend to use on most of the bosses. I suppose in my case, it's still probably going to be the belt and cloak in my case. But what's my most hated class for gameplay? Probably Warlock. And you might then ask, why do I have a level 110 Warlock? And it was simply made because, like, in our guild, we've sort of on and off tried to do outruns. You know, hopefully they'll take off again in Tomb of Sargeras, but they probably won't because they never seem to. They go for a few weeks. I think what happens is, the way they go wrong in our guild is you like do some outruns for a few weeks, and then what happens is some of those weeks people don't go to it. Of course, it's an off night, it's fine. And then, you know, and some people go to each of them, and then some people go to each of them and do extra as well because they've got lots of time and they spend a lot of time developing their outs. So what happens is after a few weeks, the ones who don't always go are very low geared. The ones who go sort of each week, like that's probably what I would do, are sort of okay geared. And then you got some who are fantastically geared, and actually they could be going into Mythic raiding. So that's probably what they want to do. They probably don't want to, week after week, schlep along to Heroic, to what would be in their eyes boosting the other alts. So they sort of seem to fall away. But anyway, when they were happening, we never seemed to have a Warlock. So, and also for summoning people in, obviously a Warlock's really useful. So I thought, I'll make a Warlock then. I was wanting my Hunter as my main alt, but I'll make a Warlock. At least we then have a summon. And then someone else made a Warlock instead. So I thought, good, because I don't like playing Warlock at all. I mean, I'd have to, or it's not so much that I hate playing it, although I do. It's especially Affliction. I'm really not keen on Affliction. It's more that it would take some proper effort for me to learn how to do it properly. To learn how to play it to an acceptable level would, I'm sure, take me longer than it would for most other classes. And because I don't play alts a lot, I would have to keep myself up to date. How long does our guild expect to take to clear Tomb of Sargeras normal? A few hours, I hope. Like, we're not going full mains, we are split raiding. We're likely to start on Heroic. Like, we don't know what it's going to be like. Like, in guilds I've been in before, for the last few years, when we've actually intended to do split runs, and it's a thing in the guild, we are doing split runs, so we want you to have an out for it. You know that you are going to clear them all in a reasonable amount of time. You're not going to spend a long time on any one boss. But that's because you've prepared specifically for it. We, up to now, well, we still don't, it's not compulsory to have an alt. So it's just that enough people do that it's worth doing the split run. But everything's been sort of done on the fly. So we don't really know how long it's going to take us to do anything. We also, as I say, not entirely sure at what point we should call it. Because although we're going to put on an extra shorter raid on Sunday, just for a fourth one, just to help us with that, to help us split the maximum so we can get as much tier as possible. Like, we're not interested in split running Kel Jaden as such because he doesn't drop tier. So, you know, we're okay on that. So the answer is I don't know. All I do know is that we will be clearing normal and heroic next week, next reset. Right, I'm not going to answer too many correct questions, but as we've got that one. It works with Divine Hammer as well. Blade of Justice means Blade of Justice. Divine Hammer is Blade of Justice. It's just a different form of it when you talent it. So anything that works with Blade of Justice works with Divine Hammer. And the tooltip does change to reflect that when you've got it. There's nothing that excludes Blade of Divine Hammer. But the other thing is, in terms of the tier, so yes, they both do. In terms of tier, speaking about that, we have... so we've put out a spreadsheet. I don't know how many of you guys do this as well. We have put out a spreadsheet sort of saying, which 4 do you want first? Because lots of people, of course, going, well, actually, I want all 6 pieces of tier so that on different fights I can mix and match, which is fair enough. But what we're saying is we want to get everyone the 4 set bonus as soon as possible. So which 4 do you want most of all? And then you can have those. And then when everyone's got their 4 set, then we'll start worrying about the other bits. Which, as I say, with split running, we'll hopefully we can get everyone their 4 pieces within 2 or 3 weeks. Hopefully. But again, that all depends on how well we do. Why all the fuss about Blade of Justice? What fuss? I haven't seen any fuss, actually. I'm not being silly there. I don't know what fuss people mean about Blade of Justice. The only fuss I've heard is people moaning, Rets moaning, about Divine Hammer being nerfed, so it makes us not as good in Cleave. Well, that's just the way it goes. But again, you know, whenever you get... I mean, this is a period for any class and spec. This patch has come with it a major class tuning balance thing. And people will always overreact to it. I mean, some people obviously have got good reason to be nervous, but then we just have to wait to see what Blizzard do at the end of next week. What's my most hated class? I don't really hate any class. If you mean like hate to play, just like I said, Warlock. So I've never liked playing the Warlock. There's never been a... And the reason for that is whichever spec I've liked playing for a particular expansion, and it does vary. It's never been Affliction. It's always been sort of between Destruction and Demonology. Whichever spec I like to play is not the spec to play. So, and I don't like any of the specs actually in Legion. I've tried them all out. I don't like any of them. Yes, I noticed that Blizzard doing their AMA this Friday. Will I go there and ask something? I think inevitably. I'm bound to ask something. I don't know what yet. Yeah, what should I ask? I don't know. Well, you can all ask anyways, can't you? What squish am I expecting next expansion? I'm expecting like a damage squish, even though, like, only because, not because I think we desperately need it now, because numbers don't mean anything anymore. Like, I'm almost tempted to just say bugger it. And Blizzard themselves has said, like, you know, instead of like saying 138,000, you could just call it 138k. What's the problem with that? 138M, 138G, blah, 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 blah. Except being Americans, they'd probably call it a B. But they... So if there's that side of it, so you could say, well, does it really matter? The other side is that if you do that sort of damage squish again, numbers squish, then it must... Because it's not simple, is it? You've got to have a situation where a level 1 can do some damage. And scale it up appropriately. I imagine it's a major undertaking. I don't know, but I would have thought it is. But they did seem to imply, I'm sure, at some point a couple of years ago, that it was coming. Because they were saying something like, and of course they could have changed their mind since, that there wasn't going to be a squish in Legion, but probably the expansion after, I think is what they actually said. So that's what I expect. I would like a level squish. I personally, I don't have any like evidence to back this up, but I personally think if you get someone playing this game from new and looking at it and thinking what I've... Because in Legion, after Legion, it'll be like getting to level 120. It's like, what? I've got to get to level 120 before I can even do the end game content. You what, mate? I imagine that's very off-putting. Very, very off-putting. And I know they give you a boost, like, but that's one boost. And yeah, okay, and they've done it well. So they give you a boost with an account every expansion. And they give you this trial thing so you could try it out. And if you like it, then you stay at that level. If you don't like it, then you don't. But it's not really enough time, is it? You don't get very much time to decide. Hi, Natroxide. So in terms of squishes, yeah, I would be more interested in seeing a level squish. I think they could do a level squish. Did they change Convergence of Fates for Red? No, they haven't. No, they haven't changed it at all. There keeps being this mad rumour going round. People keep pulling up the post where they nerfed it months ago as if it's new. It's not. They haven't done anything. They can't nerf it. It's already virtually 0 procs per minute. It can't nerf it any more than, like, it's literally 1.2 procs per minute. How can you nerf it from that? Some layers will rage at the idea of being sent back. I'm not sure why they would. Like, who needs to be 110? I'll tell you what I don't understand as well. Like, so you had Vanilla, which was 1 to 60, which was unnecessary. You didn't have to have 60 levels in the first game. But you can go with the idea. Blizzard have sort of said they never imagined it was going to go on for so many expansions anyway. So, you know, okay, they just thought, that's still mad to me. I mean, 40 is plenty. But anyway, so they did that. They went to 60. Then TBC, they added 10 levels on. Wrath, you added another 10 levels on. Then Cataclysm, it was almost like they thought, hang on a minute, this is getting a bit out of hand. So they went up 5 levels. And then Mop 5 levels. And then it was back to 10 again in WoD. And I'm thinking, why? I don't understand. They don't need us. They can still spend the same amount of time. They can just divide the experience they want us to get to level cap by 5 instead of 10. I really don't know why they're accelerating these levels. There must be a reason for it. There has to be a reason. But I just don't know what it is. Maybe that's what I would ask in the AMA. Yeah, that's what I'll ask them. If I can think of a concise way of asking it without being misunderstood. Do I think Blizzard will give us more buffs this week? If you mean by us as Rets, yes. But at the end of this reset, they'll get all their data. There's several classes and specs that are still too powerful. There's several that are not powerful enough. Specifically for Tomb of Sargeras in particular. Those types of fights. So they will tune again. Whether they get it right is another matter. But I don't think they've gone too far wrong up to now in Legion. Feels better as you're leveling to level more often. I think there's a case for that in the earlier levels. So even then it's too rapid. Like, sorry if you can hear a lawnmower going. I really can't. What idiots mowing their lawn at this time of day? I might have to... Gordon Bennett. Let me know if it's too loud. I'll just have to go and shut the window. What was I saying now? Yeah, like even without heirlooms, you get in what, 6 levels from the starter area, and you get that in like less than half an hour. Even if you're, I'm thinking as a new player, getting way less than half an hour as a more experienced player when you know what you're doing. But even as a new player, it's like half an hour or something, and you don't need to go up 6 levels in half an hour. Like you get your first level after your first quest. There's no need for that. I really don't get the node. That's fine then. I mean, it's supposed to be directional, this microphone. But okay. I mean, I have my fan on here, and people can hear that when I put the fan on. It's not on now. So I was wondering how bad that was. So, yeah, I think it goes... I understand the idea that if you're going to play a session, you want to go up a level at least in your session. And a session isn't like 5 or 6 hours for a normal person. It's like 1 or 2. That's fair enough. But I just think it's too much. But I don't know that. I mean, I don't see forums full of new players going, oh, I was going to play this, it would look really good, but I'm not going up 110 levels. That's just ridiculous. It's just that in other games, you look at other games, it's nowhere near that. In fact, I actually wonder if leveling is an outdated concept anyway. I hesitate to bring up Elder Scrolls Online again. But you notice in that game, you get your 1 to 50 levels. That's it. Every time they brought out what you might call an expansion, you don't go up any more level. There's other ways to advance your character. So it's like, stealth levels instead. Leveling disjoint, you start an area quest and then do a dungeon. Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I noticed that. I don't generally do the questing because I don't like them. But another reason for not doing questing while you're leveling is you're absolutely correct there. Again, that problem would be solved by if they brought out scaling in all the leveling zones. Because yeah, you're doing some quests, you get into a dungeon, you come out, you're much higher, especially with heirlooms, and then you find that all those quests are green or grey now, and it's like, no point anymore, is there? Whereas if it all scaled, then that wouldn't be such a problem. In fact, it wouldn't be a problem at all. You just carry on doing them. You enjoy the AP mechanic far more than leveling. In general terms, I agree with that. You could actually see, that's the thing, you see. You could actually use AP as the alternative leveling system. So you don't need new levels as such. I mean, maybe that's what they could do. Just squish the, just get rid of, have levels up to a point and then just stop. Up to 50 or something. And then just take over with the secondary thing. Yeah, I mean, I sort of think, like in MMOs, people think a bit too rigidly along certain things. I think people should think about it and try and reinvent ways of doing it. Well, it's say integral to MMOs. I think that's sometimes a bit of a problem. A lot of MMOs take their lead from World of Warcraft. Why wouldn't you? It is the most popular MMO there's ever been. Stunningly successful even now. It's not just that it's historically the most successful, it still is right now. So you obviously, you know, sometimes you hear MMO developers going, oh, we're going to make it totally different, totally different. It's like, why would you do that? You obviously don't want it to be the same. You need to give the impression that yours is different, but you obviously don't do that at the expense of good ideas. I think it's just how it feels. Like, when, I'm not saying it should be a lot quicker to get to level cap. What I'm saying is that just, it's like, you know, if you have to go rock climbing and you're shown this huge mountain as if, okay, you've got to climb that. It's like, oh my God, what? Whereas if you weren't aware of just how much there was to do, then it would be a lot better. AP feels more impactful. It does. Now, there was a time when, of course, it didn't, because there was a time that as soon as you got to level 10, every level thereafter you got a new talent. So that could feel impactful. Whereas now you don't. You get one, well, usually every 15 levels up to a point. That's no problem, Mike. So, but yeah, I you know, if I was Blizzard and doing the new, and maybe they are doing this, I bet they're not though. I would be willing to, because this is the thing about Blizzard expansions, which again is not the same for all MMOs. When you look at an expansion for an MMO in general, what does it include? It includes new content, new zones, new storylines, new dungeons, raids, whatever. It's just about the new content. Whereas with World of Warcraft, it has always been the case that with a new expansion comes new ways of doing things as well. You expect your class to be changed. Not always, it's not always massively, like Legion was a massive change. The last time there was a massive change was probably Cataclysm, and then before that TBC. But there's always like some significant changes to the way your class is going to play. There'll be other systems that they change as well. If I were Blizzard, I would examine everything. I would focus on every aspect of the game and ask the question, is there a better way of doing this? We're going to destroy, sacrifice our legendary weapons for some major purpose at the end of Legion. Yes. As I say, assuming the document that someone showed me is reliable, and at the time I was very hesitant to believe it, but it was pointed out to me that the very same person produced an exactly a type of document for WoD, and that was correct. So maybe, but it is supposedly related to, again, that it's supposed to be, and again, this is all rumours. I don't believe anything until it's done. An old gods related expansion, and it's supposed to be some event that we're supposed to be draining the power of it to like save the day type thing. Not completely, obviously, because otherwise it'd be a very short expansion. But I don't know any more details than that. I didn't keep the document, so I can't read it up again. But we are certainly going to be sacrificing our legendary weapons. We're going to be draining them to do something. I suppose it's a bit like that High Mountain quest, isn't it? You know, where the Dargrul comes out and he traps a load of the High Mountain Tauren, and you've got to use your artifact weapon to free them. It's the same sort of thing, I guess, except this time it's going to drain all its power. It's going to be basically just a stick after it. Which I suppose has to be the event when the new expansion launches, not the pre-expansion patch. That'd be no good because we're still in Legion then. It'll have to be the first quest you do when the new expansion actually opens. They will never do an auction house vendor on a mount. It's only engineers that get little tricks like that. Am I on the list of priorities to get the tier sets? I shouldn't be. No. I am one of the three that sort of decides on those things, and I've basically said no. Like, at the moment, shouldn't. See, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of the week, but in all honesty, I would think at least Shadow Priest should have higher than me. And it's very difficult to know, though, because I don't know all the classes. And you can have that document that went around that says what percentage it's going to be for each class. But the problem is that Blizzard announced a load of new tuning, and I haven't seen one updated since then. And even then, you don't know how reliable it is. You're just assuming that a lot of people who know their classes have done it properly. But at the moment, I'm considering myself... Well, I think we're supposedly now round about the same as Demon Hunters in terms of pure percentage base. Obviously, we also have to consider with the priority tier who's going to be here, because we've got several people getting ready to go on holiday. So obviously, if someone's popping off on holiday, which they are, in a couple of weeks, we're unlikely to be giving them the best tier pieces going, because that'll just be offline when we need it. And by the time they come back, hopefully everyone else has got their tier. They'll just be able to pick it up in the next heroic normal run that we do. Or heroic run, whatever it happens to be. But it's a very, very tricky process allocating tier, unless you do loads of splits, in which case everyone gets it. But when you're not, like, we're not even sure how many bosses we're going to be able to do split runs on. Hopefully, it's all of them apart from Kill Jaden on both heroic and normal. But if it's not... your guild recruited more DPS, then some of them left. Well, maybe they knew that some were leaving, that's why they recruited them. Sometimes people do actually give a heads up to their leadership, rather than just leave and say, look, we're going to leave for Tomb of Sargeras, but we'll stay for another couple of weeks so you can replace us. Oh, you mean some of the new ones have left? That's bad luck. That's a bit shit, isn't it, leaving on the day before new tier? Recruited a new tank and they've left yesterday. That is unfortunate. Do you have any DPS that that can tank in the meantime? That is always a problem, actually, if people join just to get achievements. You're always sort of on the lookout for that. Because I've known that happen. Even more of a threat for like Cutting Edge or something like that. Because they get a title with that as well, usually. Plus, of course, they can use it to get themselves into pugs. So... But yeah, if you you need a tank. I don't know how difficult it is to. I suppose you'd be able to get a tank, hopefully relatively easily, even in Manav. Tanks. It's always tricky for tanks looking for work, because mostly guilds are not looking for tanks, because tanks tend to be fairly reliable. Storyline wise, where will we be by BlizzCon? We'll be on Argus. Now let's have a think exactly where we would be. We won't have the new Argus raid out by then, because they said they expect they want tiers to last 4 to 5 months. So Tomb of Sargeras is coming out now, so that means the new Argus they'll do what they've done with this patch. So 7.3 will bring with it Argus, like the new zones and stuff, but not the raid. That will be 7.3.5, we assume. So it will be, the Argus raid will be like probably November time, which will make it round about BlizzCon time, but probably after BlizzCon. So I suppose BlizzCon will talk a lot about the new raid. I'm hoping they will be also talking about the new expansion, but who knows. But that's where we're likely to be. Where, you know, we will be on Argus by then. That should... when would that probably happen? I suppose that would probably happen like August, September time. Okay, I don't actually know what it's like for looking for tanks in them. Well, for heroic anyway. For mythic tanks, you would find one. Because, as I say, there's probably more tanks than there are tank spots in mythic. I don't know about heroic. But, well, right, so thinking about in terms of the future, let's say for the sake... The way I was thinking about it, I don't know whether this is true. I was imagining that at BlizzCon they will announce the new expansion. And then, you know, much like with Legion, probably a month or two later, they have open alpha. And that goes on for a set amount of time. And maybe the actual expansion launches the following autumn, like autumn time. So that would be 2018. And it is tricky because we'd have the Argus raid about to come out at that time. And that would last several months. But we'd also need people to be alpha and beta testing. So that's why when people moan about the content drought at the end of an expansion, you sort of need a bit of one to let people do alpha and beta testing properly. You just don't want the year-long ones that we've been having in recent years, because that's just too much. But if you've got, like, you know, if you say to a raiding guild when they've finished doing Mythic, well, there's another 6 months till the expansion, well, that's fine, 6 months worth of beta testing. Assuming we get into beta or alpha, I will be hoping very much to get back into alpha relatively early, like in Legion, but I don't know, that's up to Blizzard. How large do I think the Argus zone will be? It's a good question. I'd like to think it will be the size of a proper zone as opposed to Broken Shore, because Broken Shore obviously is not very large. We're going to a whole new planet. We're surely only going to get one zone out of it because it's not for leveling content. It's just like I would be thinking in terms of Suramar type thing, you know, that sort of thing. That's like a level cap zone with quests in it. I don't think it will have as many quests in it as Suramar has. It'd be nice if it did, especially if they were compelling, if they were useful to do. But also it depends on how much Blizzard can do based on feedback. Like, one criticism of Broken Shore has been that only, you know, I'm not saying everyone's felt like this, but some people have felt that 7.2 was disappointing because 7.2.5 was seen as the real patch because it brings the raid with it. So with Argus, if they want to avoid the same situation, they probably want a lot of content there at least. So that probably means a lot of quests. They will time gate something like they did with Broken Shore because they have to. But hopefully it will just be more interesting. Any thoughts on a new class? Has to be. Did we talk about this last week? It has to be a ranged class. I think some ideas that came up when we did talk about it, I'm pretty sure it was last week, were like necromancers. Necromancers were in Warcraft. I know that the warlocks largely took over that style of character, but warlocks are not necromancers. They don't raise the dead. I know Death Knights sort of do. Unholy Death Knights have their gimp. But yeah, I would think a necromancer would sort of work. It's just difficult storyline wise, because although gameplay wise you can make them very different to warlocks, I can well imagine warlocks, you know, having a completely different style of play. But storyline wise, they'd be very similar to warlocks, wouldn't they? Because they'd be shunned by society, you know. Certainly, because warlocks were Horde as well, they weren't Alliance. You can't imagine an Alliance race being particularly accepting of necromancers, so they'd be down in the shadows again, like warlocks. Well, Argus, I mean, it can't. Like, what a lot of people were probably hoping is that they'd make an entire expansion out of Argus, but Like, that's just a bit silly, because the same reason why I don't think they're going to do it, even though in storyline-wise, we now know that Azeroth is this embryonic titan, I don't think we're ever going to see the hatchet of this titan until right at the end of the game, because it's about Azeroth. World of Warcraft is about on Azeroth. There are other planets involved. We've got like Draenor and Argus, but ultimately it's about what goes on Azeroth. So Warlords of Draenor and TBC were both a bit iffy. You sort of got away with TBC, but ultimately, yeah, you can't just keep expanding out. Yeah, the Necromancer with Diablo. Yeah, it may not be far-fetched, this, because obviously we know that there's been several Diablo things in World of Warcraft. But, I mean, if they bring out a new class... My other issue, though, is bringing out a new class, you just think, oh, well, at least bring out a range class, start balancing it out. You would still have a 13th class, and you've got, for Mythic raiding, 20 raid spots. It's just getting ever more ridiculous to maintain 20 raid spots. And Blizzard keep insisting, like Sloopbag when he did that interview, he asked the question again, and they said, even though I was a bit annoyed he didn't follow it up with another question, they said that they're very happy with the 20 size. I wouldn't be at all happy with the 20 size as a developer. I really don't know what they're basing that on. I wish someone would ask them. But yeah, 12 class is already quite bad. Then there's got 13. And then what if there's another one a couple of years after that? It's all getting a bit tight. Hope there's something on Argus that will replace the emissary quests. Well, the quests, the world quests are the thing in this expansion. So they will inevitably have those. Much more likely to be related to the Broken Shore ones than the other zones, I would have thought. Well, I think, yeah, the Broken Shore world quests were a bit more serious, I thought. I know you've got the barrel rolling and a couple of ones like that. But by and large, they were relatively serious ones. So possibly they would be much more like that. Do you think something will happen if we tell Blizzard the problems of Rets in the MA? No, I don't think anything will happen. They'll know what the problems are. Whether they make the right decisions or not is another matter. You know, there's a reasonable chance that they will. But there's nothing really wrong with Rets other than the numbers. It's a tuning thing. The actual abilities work fine. The only criticism anyone really has about the way they work is that there are some talents that are dead talents, but I don't care about that. I really don't care. All I care about is, do I have the tools to be able to be good in Mythic Plus, single target boss fights, AoE boss fights, or you don't ever get AoE boss fights, or hardly ever, single target boss fights but with ads and stuff like that in, switching targets, that sort of thing, and we're sort of okay. Mythic would have to become flex. You cannot do Mythic Flex. This thing, people keep saying this. It's not actually possible. As soon as you put a flex system in, like the people think normally Heroic is like this flexible system where you can have as many people as you like, stuff like that. You can't. There is a way to game it. The only reason why, in reality, guilds are able to go, oh yeah, like even in Pugs, they try and keep a handle on the number of healers and stuff like that. But just in size of it, there is an optimal size and there is an optimal composition, even for Heroic and Normal. It's just that no one ever really goes on about it, because the only guilds that have the level of organisation and seriousness to take advantage of it don't need to, because they're going to blast through it in the first week and do Mythic. But if that was the hardest level of content, they would work out the exact number needed, and it will not be whoever we've got that night. It will never be that. Hi, Rinda. So it's like mathematically not possible to have a genuinely flexible system and make it really, really difficult, because they base a lot of the Mythic mechanics on the fact they've got this many people and this much room. Because you've got to think about it this way. Sometimes you've got mechanics where, because of the room you've got, are actually made more difficult having more people in it. Sometimes some bosses, like Nathendra was a classic example, felt a damn sight easier on Mythic, because Heroic, when you've got 30 people in, it's like moving around, oh shit, on the Heart of the Swarm thing. That was a bit of a nightmare. Mythic, loads easier. The only thing that made Mythic even remotely challenging was the fact you had to reduce those stacks, otherwise you keep getting mind controlled. But yeah, so in those sort of fights, you take hardly anyone. And then you might have one where actually it helps to have lots of people because lots of soaking mechanics, something like that. And then you do the other way around. So you'd be leaving swathes of people on the bench. And as I say, there's always going to be a perfect number for any particular boss. 7-mana scale and Mythic plus dungeon. You've probably got more scope for talking about flexible sizes for dungeons. Potentially. The issue always with dungeons is getting a healers and tanks. Like yet again, this is the second time I've done this in the past month, left it to the last minute to do my plus 10. And because usually what happens is, I think we're getting to the point now where most people don't want to do lots. Like I've been in that situation for months where I don't want to do loads of them. So loads of people do them on like Wednesday or Thursday, but that's after raise. It's like, it's getting late for me. I want to go to bed. I'm knackered. Friday, I'm knackered at the end of the week. So although I'll be on at some point, you know, unless there's people going right there and then, I'm probably going to miss that. The last few weeks I've been really busy at work, so weekends I've been on to do like the videos and stuff, but I've not been on to do much gaming. And then it gets to Monday, and I was on last night, but no one really was interested in doing a group. So then you get to Tuesday, it's the last day, it's like, right, I need a group, we're going, I need a group, and you just have to wait like half an hour to pick a group up. And even then, people were just taking pity on me. You could tell people didn't really want to do it. So, yeah. So it would be probably better in some ways to do flex. I should just bite the bullet and learn to tank, I suppose. Let's have a look. Even if breakpoints didn't matter, people would just kick everyone who isn't one of their best. Well, that's the thing though. There will always be like, you know, people will put effort into, especially with world like races being a thing. And I don't just mean world first race. All Mythic cutting edge guilds are in a race of some sort. And they will just pick whatever it is seems to be the perfect number. And that's not very inclusive. So they have to have a fixed size. It's just that fixed size, I think, is too small. It should go back to 25. Mostly people don't want to do too much with these affixes. There is an element of that as well. This week's affixes were not nice. And I didn't even do anything higher than like a 10. Pain in the ass. But yeah, when you get affixes that work against each other as well, it's like quaking's going to be a thing. So it'd actually be a really good idea if we got in and out of combat really quickly. So let's just AoE everything down really quickly. Oh, now we've got bursting, by the way. Okay, let's not AoE things down really quickly. Let's take even longer on trash packs. Good. I am told, I'm reliably informed that, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 weeks, that there will be a very kind one, which is like Raging Volcanic and Tyrannical, which is pretty decent. Saw thread on, let's have a look. Giving famous examples of classes outside the game. Conan the Barbarian being an example of a D&D Barbarian. Any thoughts of example of Warcraft Paladin? Not... I mean, not directly, because they are very much based on Dungeons and Dragons Paladins, really. They're, you know, the Paladins in World of Warcraft are basically lifted from Dungeons and Dragons Paladins. If you read it, you will see that Retribution Paladins, that is, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be a Retribution Paladin, because the Dungeons and Dragons Paladin, it just reads like a Retribution Paladin. Oh, Raging Volcanics this week. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's a nice one. I'm fine with that. But yeah, so that's I can't think of any other games that have paladins in like that I can think of. But yeah, as I say, Dungeons and Dragons are just like that. Like when I play I always play Baldur's Gate again every couple of years. I'll probably play it again this summer. I always take 2 paladins. I don't play single player anymore because that's boring. So I just play I did that once just for the storyline, and then I do my own super groups now. So I just get 6 pre-made characters, and there's always 2 paladins in it. One of which with a big two-hander, one of which dual wielding. Cracking. But this is why as well I would quite like with the Warcraft movies for them, like I think, especially reading certain reviews, because I say I couldn't understand why the Warcraft movie didn't do well in North America. It did well elsewhere. Didn't do well in North America. And it wasn't until I started reading some reviews that I started to get a picture of why that might be. Now, no one explicitly said it, but what I was very much getting from it was, to someone who doesn't understand fantasy, and that's what most of them goes like. Most of the people who watch the Lord of the Rings films had not necessarily read the Lord of the Rings, or really any sort of thing from fantasy genre. And that's what you need for a film to be successful. You can't rely on fantasy fans. And it's like, they just saw it as a Tolkien ripoff. Because what did it have? It has orcs. Oh, orcs come directly from Tolkien, which they do. So they couldn't get past the fact that it was a Tolkien knockoff. Whereas if you start to put things like paladins in it, and they start to do the storyline instead of the orcs versus humans things, they start to do something with, say, the Legion more directly, or paladins, you know, or the Scourge, that sort of thing. That's different. You'd get away with that because that wouldn't be, even though that itself is taken from things, it's not, people wouldn't see that explicitly as a Tolkien ripoff. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I got into Paladin because it depends how many people you're playing Dungeons and Dragons with. 5 is a good number because you have 1 Dungeon Master and 4 people in the party. I mean, you can have as many people in the party as you like. But 5 is a really good number. And with that, I mean, this is where Dungeons and Dragons shines, really, because the Dungeon Master can do what they want. If they're cunning enough. So, but the ideal, I mean, I first of all played a wizard because the ideal party is a fighter, a wizard, a thief, and a cleric, because they cover everything. Whereas paladins, they're not brilliant at anything, but they're pretty good at several jobs. So, so I played a wizard to begin with, thinking that, you know, Paladin wouldn't really be all that great. But then they just persuaded me, well, if you want to play Paladin, because, you know, the Dungeon Master will just change things as necessary to make it all fit. Yeah, but that's the thing. If you put orcs in it, people will in. The thing is, if you even put like, there's not that many really popular fantasy films. Fantasy films that do well are few and far between. But the thing, if it's not really obvious the link, then people go with it. Like Star Wars, for example. Star Wars is King Arthur in space. But because it's not really overt, no one, when Star Wars came out, went, that's just Excalibur. What are you doing? Same as The Lion King. People didn't go, that's just Hamlet. What are you playing at? Because it was different enough. Well, I persevere with trying to load Star Wars The Old Republic. No, because it won't do it. I've done everything that every bit of advice to me has suggested, and it's not working. I will be able to when I can be bothered, because it's on the hard drive in my other computer. I can just take the hard drive out, connect it to this one temporarily, put it onto my other drive, and we're a shoo-in. But until that happens, because I can't be asked at the moment, because I haven't even got time to play at the moment, to bugger it. I was hoping, actually, because that's another thing with Star Wars The Old Republic. Like any other MMO, You go to your subscription area. If you say, I no longer wish to subscribe, you just click the I no longer wish to subscribe. You get a box going, are you really sure? It's a really great game. You go, yeah, stop it. None of that. You cannot actually cancel your subscription to Star Wars: The Old Republic. But I'm hoping I've done what I can do, which is to delete my card from it, because then it can't take a payment from anything. It doesn't have any cards on it. So I was hoping at some point I'll get an email from them going, oh, I see you're not playing Star Wars: The Old Republic anymore. Is the reason why? To which I could reply to them and go, yes, I cannot load it onto my hard drive. You don't seem to want to offer me any help because you don't. Try and contact them, you get nothing. It's not even easy to contact them. Try and remember. I played 3rd edition first of all, but I do have. Do I have 5th edition books? I'm pretty sure I do. When did 5th edition come out? They're in the next room, actually. Oops. I know I've got the 4th edition books as well. I'm pretty sure I've got the 5th ones too. But I don't think I've ever played 5th edition. I got them just for reading because it's many, many years since I've known anyone that plays it. And I suppose now, even if I went looking to see if there's a group round here, then I don't have time anymore. I said, well, maybe. I don't know. It depends how often people like playing it, I suppose. Oh, if it's only been out for a couple of years, then I probably... Oh, it's 2014. No, I won't do then. Maybe I should get there. Maybe that can be my reading project this summer. I'll get 5th edition and read those just for the sake of reading it. I like reading the books. I mean, before I ever started playing Warhammer, sorry, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I started by buying a couple of army books and just reading them for the lore. I used to quite like reading just for that. I mean, one bizarre thing, actually, there's loads of Warcraft books I haven't actually read, speaking of it. I keep thinking one summer I should just get all the Warcraft books and read through them. But every time I do that, every time I come to another summer, there's like more books. And I'm thinking, I don't even know which order they go in now. I wish someone would just do a box set where it's clearly in which order they are and just start at the beginning and go the way through. Or get them on Kindle or perhaps something like that. But yeah, at the moment I'm quite happy just spending a few hours on Elder Scrolls Online at the weekend. Just playing my Warden. And it's a nice game to play casually. Yeah, well, the other thing is, I also know if I did get all the books and start reading them, that I would be reading stuff that has since been retconned. You know, because I have read some of the books. I'm not completely ignorant on the lore outside of the game. But, you know, there's a lot of books I haven't read. And I can't always remember which books I have read and which I haven't, because I didn't buy them. I got them from libraries. I haven't been to a library for a couple of years. But yeah, so some of the earlier books... And when I say earlier, I mean anything older than about 2 years, has been retconned now, I should think. Certainly some of it will have been. And some of it didn't even make sense in terms of the storyline in the game when it was brought out. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Another game that's actually really good. And missed a lot of people by for just like tabletop role-playing game was one that Warhammer brought out, which was Warhammer Quest. Because you had Hero Quest, that was the Snakes and Ladders equivalent of a fantasy game. Then you had Advanced Hero Quest, which brought a bit more flexibility to it. That was decent. But then they had Warhammer Quest. That was really good. I would still like to play that now. Oh, okay. I can find the book order. But again, well, you say that. Here's my issue. I'm going to read some of these books, though. I probably should. I should. Every summer I give myself a reading project, because I was saying at work today, actually, we were talking about books, and I was saying that summer is the only time I get, maybe sometimes Christmas, to read books. Because when I read a book, I read a book. I don't, like, I'm not one of these people who can read a few chapters, then put it down and pick it up a few days later. When I read it cover to cover, which is why, to this day, if I saw J.K. Rowling in the street, I would probably slap her. Because, like, the first Harry Potter book is fine. You read that, a kiddie's book. The next few were fine as well. Then after 4, they started getting a bit bigger. And I remember the 5th book, reading it on Friday, because it came out on Friday. They always come out on Fridays for some reason. So I was there on Friday, reading it, and I couldn't get to the end of it before I fell asleep. So I had to read it the next morning. I didn't like that. 6th book was even worse. And then the 7th book took me like the weekend to do. Huge. Not interested, no. So, yeah, because I don't like putting books down. If it's any good, anyway, if I like putting the book down, it's not very good. I'm not going to bother. So, the only time when I actually get to read books and consume them at all without being interrupted is during summer. So that's when I tend to do it. So I have been thinking recently, which book should I get this summer? And, yeah, so... I mean, I might just read Lord of the Rings again, maybe. Maybe I'll just read Lord of the Rings again, because there's some books I read every few years. But maybe I'll get some new ones, like, as I say, I could get the new Dungeons and Dragons books, or maybe I could get the Warcraft books and just read through those. I'm not as... It's not that I don't like Terry Pratchett, I just don't like it enough to read it. Like, the same person that got me into Warhammer Fantasy Battle at university also persuaded me to read some Terry Pratchett. And it's like, it's really weird. When I read them, I read a couple. And when I read them, I got to the end and I thought, I'm not saying they're bad. I just didn't enjoy them as much as other books that I generally read. So, no, I'm not a fan of Terry Pratchett. As I say, it's not that I think they're bad. They're just not interesting enough for me. They're the sort of thing, like, there's been a couple of TV adaptations. If it's on in the background, I'll watch it. But I can't be bothered to read it. Yeah, Christopher Lee always said he read it every year. He was a massive fan. But I'll tell you what I've been watching recently as well, a few clips on YouTube. I'd completely forgotten about this. Because like before the Lord of the Rings films, the Peter Jackson ones, there was an animated one when I was really small. And I have that on DVD. I used to really like that. The films are now better. But what I'd completely forgotten about is, because in that film, like the Lord of the Rings film, it sort of does Fellowship of the Ring. And it does a little bit, it does the Two Towers, but really, really quickly. It's like, wow, really quick. Like the Battle of Helm's Deep lasts about 10 seconds. But then what I'd forgotten is they also did a Return of the King film, which is actually terrible now that I watch it. I remember also quite liking that one. But I've been watching some clips of it recently on YouTube. It's god awful. I don't think I could sit through it anymore. What do I think of the film Interstellar? I haven't seen it. That's what I think of it. Sorry. I generally don't watch science or historical films because I am one of those people who will not let it go if there's something wrong. And historical films and science films get things wrong all the time. Brandon Sanderson. No, I've not heard of them. Maybe I'll have to look them up then. But yeah, I will decide at some... Obviously, I've got 3 more weeks to decide what I get, and then I will send off. I'll get on old Amazon and send off for a load of books to read. Like some people get box sets of DVDs, I get books over summer. As well as having more time to spend actually doing YouTube stuff, of course. How have the class mounts gone down with your friends and guildies? No one's really mentioning them at all. So I haven't even got mine yet. I'm slowly picking away at it. I've no interest in it because it's rubbish. I mean, sometimes I'll read books that are not actually well written just because, like, again, going back to Warhammer, there was a series of books on Gotrek and Felix, which I used to read. Even though the author who wrote them was very unimaginative. The stories were quite good. They were just badly written. So he had good enough imagination to come up with decent stories. But, you know, he kept reusing phrases. And they were inappropriate phrases as well. His metaphors, in particular, were awful. Although he did seem to get better as the series went on. It's almost like he improved as an author. Which I say almost like as if it's a silly thing. But yeah, sometimes I will. Now, Gotrek and Felix. They are... Gotrek is a dwarf slayer. So these are like in the Warhammer world. These are dwarfs that have shamed themselves in some way. So what they do is they partially shave their heads, dye their hair and beard orange, and then wear no armour, but basically try and die courageously. They go and try and fight the biggest, nastiest thing they can see, start a fight with it in the hope that it will kill them. But they don't just wait for it to kill. They obviously don't. They have to put up a fight. So basically, suicidal nutters. And Gotrek was a human who wanted to chronicle his adventures, so he went around with him. I haven't read Asterix since I was a kid, along with Tintin and the other sort of continental European literature that I read as a kid that I haven't read since. We seem to have turned this into the literary hour. But no, we got talking about books, like fancy books at work, because like someone at work was saying how their kid, I've forgotten how old his kid is now, it's pre-teen, and they're saying he's like, they were sort of getting him, he was watching the Harry Potter stuff, and they're saying they were okay with the first few, and then he got to the Deathly Hallows, and he was watching the first 45 minutes before bed, and then this colleague of mine and his wife were watching the rest of it, and they thought, oh, it's a bit dark this, we shouldn't really let him watch it. And then he said, and I immediately knew what would happen at this point. And they were saying he started sulking. I said, of course it is. You let him watch part of a film and not let him watch the rest of it. What's my favourite book of all time? Oh, I don't know. I mean, Lord of the Rings would be the easiest thing to say. It's certainly the one I have reread the most. But there's a lot of books I used to like reading. But that's the one I've reread the most. So probably I would have to say that. There were a few other books I had as a kid that I used to reread quite a lot as well, like The Demon Headmaster, Return of the Jedi in novel form, which I bought when I went to see the film. What else? I used to read like Doctor Who books as well, before videos and DVD was a thing. So if you wanted to like know what happened in older stories, then you basically went out and got a book. So I used to go to the library each Saturday and get out some new books. But yeah, it would. I think it would inevitably have to be Lord of the Rings. Lady Sylvanas drew a major role. You would think so. She's War Chief. She's got to be War Chief for a reason. That's what got me when Blizzard got really arsey. Like, because they said with Legion, like when Vol'jin did his speech about, you know, the spirits have given me clarity, blah blah blah. Because nothing else, you know, otherwise no one would have chosen her to be War Chief. And then a developer during a Q&A was sort of saying, you know, there's obviously more to that story to come. And then later on, a few months later, when they were asking, in fact, it was actually quite recently, I think, they were asking, so when are we going to see Vol'jin's story continued? And then whoever it was, it may have been Ian Hazaccosta, but some developer said anyway, he's dead. What more do you want? So I don't know either. See, there's two possibilities now. Either there is a story to tell, it's just not the right time to tell it, or, which I now think is much more likely, they wanted to kill Vol'jin off for reasons. I don't know what reason. Maybe they just don't feel he cuts it as War Chief. Okay? So they've killed him off, and then it's like, well, who's going to be War Chief? There's no prominent orcs now. There's no obvious orc to take over. There's obviously no prominent troll to take over because Vol'jin was the only famous troll, really. I suppose some die-hard Horde players will go, oh, what about blah, 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 that no bugger else has heard of. It can't be the Blood Elf guy, who's Lorthamas, or whatever his name is, because he's pointless. It can't be the Goblin one, because he just cares about money. He don't care about the Horde. You know, Bane, not suitable either, really. So there was no obvious candidate. Sylvanas is the only one with any real leadership qualities. So they maybe just made that spirits thing up just for the hell of it. Well, I've read a lot of Stephen King in the past. I'm not as big a fan of that sort of stuff as I used to be. But I have read quite a lot of that in the past. I mean, I'm now much more actually into gaming it, because the way I see it is you can watch like films and television, but that's entirely passive. It's okay, but it's passive. You can read books, that's a little bit less passive because you can imagine the characters' voices and looks and stuff like that. But still, it's still set in stone. And then with gaming, you see, you've still got a story that's dictated for you, and you've got various things dictated for you. But you're part of it a lot more. So I think gaming is like the next level up from literature, really. Role-playing gaming, that is. Because you are part of that story. My favourite PvP mount. Have you actually asked me that question? What's my favourite PvP anything? The answer is always the same. I don't PvP. I have no idea. I was only vaguely aware that they even got mounts. I sort of knew that. But I have no idea what any of them look like. No interest in PvP in Warcraft. Because until they make it actually proper battle, then I will never have any interest. The steed that patrols near portals. I've possibly not even noticed that. I don't remember seeing a steed that patrols anywhere in Dalaran. But I don't pay that much attention. Although I do run around quite a lot. Maybe it's me. Are you not? Is that me that you're confusing it with? I tend to go around the new portals quite a lot. But that's just me riding around Dalaran. But I am just thinking, yeah, we're probably I don't know, if we're about 2 weeks away from 7.3 on the PTR. I can't remember. Does anyone remember when 7.1.5 came out, when they put up the 7.2 patch? I can't remember how long after. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. So it may be the end of June or early July. Hopefully it's round about, well, it will inevitably be in time for when I'm off, because I finish work, my last day of work for summer is the 14th of July. So it'll already be out by then. But then the other thing, as I say, well, they have to let us see the zones at least. If I could bring back any removed Paladin spell or ability, what would it be? Hammer of Wrath. There's lots of abilities that I would like back, but Hammer of Wrath is top of the list. Without any hesitation whatsoever. I mean, things like seals and auras, it's not that I would want them back because they were rubbish, but I would want them to make them good. I didn't want them to get rid of them. I wanted to make them make sense. Not good as in overpowered, but make sense. I mean, they come up with such rubbish reasons as well. I'd have preferred it if they'd have just said, we don't want you to have Hammer of Wrath for reasons. Because they kept trying to come up with reasons that were clearly rubbish. That's my problem with it. It's like they said, oh no, executes, that's a warrior only thing. But it's not just warriors that have executes. And they said, oh, we noticed the Paladin was becoming, it had too many mid-ranged abilities like Hammer of Wrath. And it's like, well, Feral Druids can do all of their attacks from ranged. We frequently get our Feral Druid to attack from ranged when it's more convenient to do so. So, us having the odd ability that can be used from range, again, it doesn't make any sense to say, oh, that's an issue. It's an issue that you have some abilities that you can use from range, but it's not an issue that this other melee can do all of their abilities from range. So the reasoning never makes sense. And when the reasoning doesn't make sense, I am suspicious of motives, because it's like, well, why would you lie? You know, you can make any decision you like. You are the game developers. Why lie about it? If you're lying about it, it implies that even you know that the reasoning is not good. So they'd be better off just saying, because we're going to take this ability away because we want to. We don't think you'll need it. Oh, well, yeah, that was the other thing. Can't be like Warriors, but here, have Colossus Smash instead. Yeah, I mean, even though it's arguably not as bad as Colossus Smash, because, you know, Arms Warrior, like, I'm not saying, like, disparagingly, because, you know, any class and spec is difficult to play at the very highest level, but at a basic level, it's like, Colossus Smash, spend all my rage stuff. Mortal Strike, Mortal Strike, Mortal Strike. Oh, Colossus Smash isn't up anymore, let's just wait now. I thought it was a waste of time redoing the 1 to 60 Azeroth quests. A complete waste of time. Because the irony for me was, not only, I mean, I know that the new style of questing fit in with their preferred philosophy now, which is where you have quest hubs. You go to a place, get a load of quests, complete them, finish them, they send you off to another hub, blah, 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 which I think is boring, but okay, whatever. But the pointlessness of it in Cataclysm was that they brought this thing in as if to say, okay, we've got all these new quests now. And ignoring the fact that they made no sense chronologically either. They also introduced something that had been starting to come into the game ever since TBC, but it was perfected in Cataclysm, which was the looking for dungeon tool. So you do all this 1 to 60 content, and then no one does it, because the most efficient way to level is to just stay in Orgrimmar and Stormwind and click looking for dungeon. And have a biscuit while you wait for the queue to pop. And if they are going to spend a lot of time on redoing earlier level content, it should be for level scaling. They should scale it all. But I don't know how easy that is for them to do. I have little doubt that if it was easy, they would probably do it, because it makes no sense not to do it. But yeah, so, but no, it's going to keep. I mean, they're obviously not going to redo all the 160 content again, even though a lot of things now don't make sense. There's like, I was creating a new mage yesterday, human mage, and you get in the thing again. It's about, oh, Varian's now like done something. I'm thinking, no, he's dead. And again, it's talking about like post Northrend stuff, post Wrath of the Lich King, and it's like, well, he's long dead, so to speak. So even the starting animation and voice and narration doesn't make any sense now. What do I think the next expansion's Garrison or Order Hall could be? I think it will be gone. I think it will be judged to be a failed project. The only reason I think we had an Order Hall in Legion was because they were making, we've got to remember, Legion and Walls of General were made in parallel. When they saw how unpopular Garrisons were, you can see Order Halls, right? Order Halls were clearly not intended to have loads of Paladins in there. It doesn't make any sense, does it? You're the Ashbringer, it's supposed to be this unique weapon, and you've got loads of Paladins with Ashbringers. It was clearly, it should have been, the only thing that makes sense is we should have phased into it. But they got rid of that because that was one of the criticisms of Garrisons. So it's like they ripped out as much as they could of Garrisons. Because really they should have expanded it. If Garrisons were going to be good in WoD, because Garrisons themselves weren't the first. The first thing was the farming mop. That was the very first form of it, testing that technology out. And then the Garrisons was really going, you know, running away with it. But it was so unpopular that it was like, okay, they had to do the Order Halls. It had to be, because it was already in the game at that point of development. So they just toned a load of things down. But I think for the new expansion, they will get rid of it. I'm not saying they'll get rid of all the elements altogether. You know, the missions, for example, I think they will still sort of have. I don't think people complain much about the missions. But in terms of the actual area, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there wasn't another equivalent. Do I think the level scaling is a bit of a slippery slope? Let's see. If they scale all zones, does that mean to need to properly level scale all dungeons, which removes the need for time walking? They don't have to scale dungeons as well. That might be a natural next step, you could argue, but there is no need at all for them to do that. And in fact, they wouldn't anyway, because the same with raids. People like doing old dungeons around, just running through them to get various things for transmog and stuff like that. So they wouldn't actually do that, and there's no need for them to do it either. They don't have to do it. Because remember, think about it this way now. We don't even, like, okay, with Legion now they've gone back to it. There used to be a time when you got quests for dungeons in the zone. Like, you would do a quest chain in the zone, then you would get a quest for a dungeon, then you go into the dungeon. They got rid of those, really. You now get the quests in the dungeons themselves. I know for Legion they've gone back to the other way, but that's what I mean. So it's not like you'd be leveling through, say, Westfall. Okay, you'll be doing the storyline in Westfall for the Deadmines dungeon, but there's nothing to say you could be doing that at level 40, and then you need to go into the dungeon to finish the quest off. You can get away with that because you can have done that quest anyway. Player house and dead in the water for the new expansion, I think inevitably. Whether it's permanently dead in the water depends on a few things, because what I was being told, I don't know whether it's correct or not, was that the chief naysayer on it was Chris Metzen. Well, he's not there now. So if he was the main driving force against it, then maybe they would do that in there. Do I know what item level Mythic plus 15 gives? No. It wasn't. You couldn't know in the PTR, and Blizzard haven't said. So the first time we will find out is during that Mythic week, I think. So no, I don't. I think they can scale the dungeons without. Sorry, scale the zones without scaling the dungeons. I think that's fine. I don't think they will, because if it takes a lot of time and effort, again, it's like sometimes Blizzard do things and they cock it up a bit. And they don't realise their mistake, so they just assume the idea was bad, and then they never go back to it. Like Cataclysm, for example. I wasn't there at the start of Cataclysm, but I was told that the dungeons at the start of Cataclysm, like the level cap ones, were massively difficult. And a lot of people complained. And Blizzard were taken aback by this, because they thought, oh, these are fantastic, these dungeons. And a lot of people felt like that as well. But a load of people took to the forums to complain how impossible they were. And what was the result of that? We got 3 new dungeons partway through Cataclysm that were pathetically simple. The dungeons in MOP were truly pathetic. The most pathetic dungeons there's ever been. And then the dungeons in WoD were also similarly feeble. It's only with like Challenge Mode, I suppose, and now Mythic Plus, that dungeons have become a serious content again. So... and again, it's the same thing. Like the 1 to 60 revamp in Cataclysm, has it been a success? No. So they may now argue, what is the point in going back and revamping lower level content, because we did it before and people didn't like it, failing to understand what it was they didn't like. They would appreciate level scaling. Now, if it was a relatively straightforward thing to do, I think they would do it. But if it would require significant resources, then I don't think they will. And the same may be true of player housing. Because again, think about the criticisms that people had with Garrisons. One of the big criticisms, and that's why I think we don't zone into our order hall, was people didn't like just being stuck in their garrison. You know, they wanted to be amongst other people in like a city. Well, Blizzard would take that argument and go, well, player housing is not that, is it? That's not sociable either. How do you think they could handle a level squish if they ever had one? There's 2 ways. They can either decide not to. There's nothing to say we have to go up levels when a new expansion comes out. but I think they will still persist with that. So in reality, what I would do is say, okay, if we did vanilla again, how many levels would we have? 40. So I would try, I'm not saying it's as easy as this, because there are other considerations as well. But I would try and scale it so that the vanilla content, instead of 1 to 60, was 1 to 40. And then I would also try and scale it so every expansion after that gave 5 levels. So then that would be, so up to 40 for vanilla, 45 for TBC, 50 for Wrath, 55 for Cataclysm, 60 for Mop, 65 for WoD, 70 for Legion, going up to 75 for the new expansion. And I gotta say, I can understand why it's not as easy as that, because for purposes of doing old content and stuff like that, old raids and stuff. And so it would be a big job, but that's what I would do. Yeah, well, this is it, Manav. This is exactly my point. I don't know this, but I can imagine potentially new players being put... Because players of role-playing games know that you don't do the good stuff until you've reached level cap. Level cap is your advanced tutorial to the game. It's not the game itself. Okay? You know, if you want to play it properly, you know that you need to get to level cap. And just looking at it and going, 110 levels, what? It just seems huge. Hiya, Warlock. Mage main. Well, as long as you're not a gnome main, then that's fine. All welcome here. But yeah, so I just think it's ridiculous number of levels. Do away with levels altogether. There needs to be something. It's like someone said before, you do need something to show progression. And when you've played a game, let's say you're leveling and you've gone on to, you know, you've gone on for a couple of hours. You want some tangible progress for your character. You don't want to feel that you were just doing quests for 2 hours and haven't got close to the, you know, you need something that you're doing. Shouldn't make it feel like you need to rush to max level. Well, I don't think the game does that directly, because I think the leveling content is good. But people will put themselves under... If people like are experienced players of role-playing games, they will know that if there's a leveling system, that you want to get to level cap to access the end game content. So they will put themselves under the pressure to do it as quickly as possible. Which is why it's a little bit harsh that heirlooms, like, because, you know, they're to the point where a new player wouldn't, unless they had a friend who could sponsor them, wouldn't be able to get heirlooms. So that's like, it's like intended for your alts. But there is always going to be that if you want to get yourself into endgame ASAP, there is always going to be the feeling of that rush. A new player must hate or never bother with leveling dungeons, players rolling alts. And so many times it's just a Zerg race through. There is that. That's actually what puts me off doing them in Elder Scrolls Online, actually. Partly it was because they were really difficult when Elder Scrolls Online came out. And maybe they still are. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I can well imagine a lot of players now know how to play their class properly, and I'm total polar opposites. Like with World of Warcraft, I know what I'm doing, sort of. Elder Scrolls Online, I'm a complete noob. And yeah, I would worry, because I had the same thing happen in Star Wars: The Old Republic. You know, I'd be there doing these, I can't remember what they call them now, but they're effectively dungeons, and I was clearly lagging behind everyone else because I was reading through all that cutscene rubbish that they do with the narration, instead of just jamming on something really quickly. But I soon learned to do that. But even then, I didn't know where I was going sometimes. So, yeah. So I don't actually know. The only time I've ever experienced new player syndrome in World of Warcraft was when I stopped playing. Just before Ulduar came out, I stopped playing and took a huge break because I was so annoyed with early part of Wrath. It was the first tier in Wrath was a shambles. So I stopped playing completely. And then I came back round about the end of Firelands in Cataclysm. So I came back and I leveled up my Paladin. Was amazed at how much stats people had. I thought it was ridiculous, this explosion in stats. But I leveled it up, and I was doing dungeons, and of course I didn't know how to do the dungeons. But this was very late on in the expansion, so everyone else did. So I had that feeling of not wanting to cock up for the first time in the game ever. Because the last time I was that ignorant of it, so was everyone else, because the game was only just out. Any statistics how long it takes a new player to get to 110? No, but I did see a statistic many years ago, which may well still be true, I don't know, that basically said quite a surprisingly large percentage of players don't have any characters at level cap, even halfway through an expansion. Again, I don't know whether that is still the case, but that was an interesting one, that there are a lot of people who play the game and subscribe, or were, and they never get to level cap. They're just, pottering about. Give people an option to join a rushing group or a slower paced group. Well, when you're queuing up for a dungeon, you just want to get into a dungeon ASAP, don't you? And who's gonna queue themselves as slow as hell? Yeah, well, that's it. You see, if you take a significant period of time off, there will be things change, because things don't just change at the start of an expansion. That's when you get the most change. But you get aspects of the game changing throughout an expansion as well. Yes, I know there was a box that you could use to act as a guide. I reckon people used to just tick that because they thought it might get them into the queue quicker. I don't know whether it actually did it or not. You've got a legendary. Is it a good one? What aspect of it's unintuitive? Oh, Leadrin's, congrats. What bit's unintuitive with the DK? Do you mean the quests? I know the quest with the eye, you sometimes have to think about it a bit. Oh, I see. Old quest mechanics different from Legion, yeah. Well, that is certainly a thing, obviously. The DK starting area has not changed since, it was brought in. Oh, actually, it has changed a little, but not much. I think only to introduce new races, really. Yes, well, that is the problem with the DK quest line. Unless you've got heirlooms, you, as I recall, are like something like level 57, but you have to level 58 to go to Hellfire Peninsula. So you are, yes, there is an awkward situation where if you're level 57 because you don't have heirlooms, you're just thinking, well, what do I do now? And that was always very bad. The Demon Hunter is a lot better because you don't have to do old content, you go straight into the new content. Whereas with the Death Knight, even when it was new, you didn't go, because then you had to do you had to do some vanilla content, because as I say, when I got my DK, I was level 57 when I finished, so I had to do something in like Burning Steps or something futile just to get a level, and then go to Hellfire Peninsula, which is TBC content. So you had to do all the TBC content, which at that point was old. And then, because at least with Demon Hunters as well, before Legion came out, if you pre-ordered it, you were allowed to start playing your Demon Hunter early. I mean, I remember taking mine into Hellfire Citadel for a couple of weeks to get a bit of gear. It is better for Legion. Grind boars in blasted lands. Well, you could, I suppose. I just went to Burning Steps because I'd gone to Stormwind anyway to have fruit thrown at me. So it was an easy thing just to go to the Burning Steps. Yeah, well, it was badly done, the Death Knight thing, from that point of view. That it did sort of, I mean, it told you to go to the city, but it didn't tell you to go anywhere after that. And it should have been done so that you would be at least level 60. Like, I actually think it should have been done so you were level 70 and just started on the new content. It made no sense to me to make you do the whole of TBC content when it was old content even then. The closest thing you do get some direction because you get the message boards, don't you? But again, you have to know where they are. Actually, that's the point. When you make a new Death Knight now, do you go, is it Anduin you take your letter to now? I suppose it would have to be. Because it was varying. Gamer, with Liadrins, you just, whatever. Liadrins, Whispers, Chain, any two of those is sort of okay. It depends which is best for you. How do I feel about melee versus ranged DPS? Like Nighthold was fairly melee friendly. It wasn't for every fight, but it was fairly melee friendly. Tomb of Sargeras does not look like being as melee friendly. But the thing is, even though we said Nighthold was melee friendly, not to the point where, apart from on Gul'dan, you wanted lots of melee. You would still always be at least as good, if not better, with more ranged. And that's always the case. So, my feelings on melee versus ranged are the same as they always have been, that it is very harsh on melee players, because most balanced rosters, you generally want more range than melee, but there are more melee DPS classes, loads more, to the point where you can have, I mean, the 6 out of the 12 classes have to be melee, no choice in the matter. And then there's a further 3 that can choose to be melee or ranged, and then there's only 3 that have to be ranged. That's madness. So if you get roughly the same numbers of players playing each class, you're inevitably going to end up with loads more melee players, which means competition for melee spots is fierce, because it's not even like there's 50% of the spots are for melee. And competition for range spots is much less fierce, so you can have relatively modest players getting into much better guilds than they'd normally get into, thinking there's something special, when actually they're just playing an in-demand class. And I mean, if I thought about it in detail, I might well be able to understand why Blizzard can't do a lot about it, but they haven't helped themselves by bringing out 3 new classes since the game came out, and all of them could only play melee as DPS. That was the big nonsense of it. All 3 of them are tanking classes as well, which doesn't help. It doesn't help to have so many tanking classes when any guild only wants 2 tanks, because then you have to make them all play differently, and play differently means have strengths and weaknesses. Well, yeah. Well, that's melee problem in general, in terms of you don't get to look at the scenery as much. You get to see it a little bit if you zoom out. But the thing is, even if they bring out a new range class, and it would be it would be preferable if it was also a male class. That's more difficult though. Like if they bring out a necromancer, that can't be a male wearing class. The only thing I could think of is like dark ranger type thing, but you know, another class that uses a bow but isn't a hunter. The problem is if you get them to wear male as well, then they will just basically be, it's like they've invented a new spec for a hunter but given it to a new class. But if they increase the number of ranged classes, they might improve the balance a little bit, but you'll just still create the situation where you have too many classes. Shadow Hunter, yeah. Well, I was thinking of like Sylvanas type thing, because, you know, you think about what Sylvanas is. The closest you come up to is a hunter because she uses a bow. You know, and I suppose she's quite similar to what the old survival hunter was before it went melee. But, well, no other classes use a bow apart from a hunter. Apart from, you know, rogues and warriors used to use it for pulling. That was about it. But there's no reason why they can't come up with a new class that also uses a bow that isn't a hunter. That's like an assassin type thing. A bard, well, you could imagine a bard being a leather class, but there's also plenty of leather classes already. So, but there's no reason why another class couldn't use a bow without being a hunter. You have multiple classes use every other weapon that there is. And again, a bard is again more melee focused. Well, I was thinking when they were doing the demon hunter, there was no reason why they couldn't have done a ranged spec for them. But they wanted this thing with the glaives, didn't they? Because it wasn't, the demon hunter wasn't about making demon hunters as a playable class. It was about making Illidan's. People wanted to be Illidan. That's what that was about. Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've talked before about there's lots of problems. I think the new player experience in WoW is appalling. I've said so before. And I suppose it'll only be a matter of time before I say so again. There's lots and lots of things that are incredibly confusing to a new player. Clerics can even wear plate on just, you know, they're okay wearing plate. Because you can actually have them as mini fighters, not very good ones. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily want them to wear plate unless you had, as long as you had a fighter in the class. Yes, you could well argue cleric is like a holy paladin, really. I mean, I wouldn't mind it if they were not, you know, if they introduced, like, some part of me thinks they should actually reduce the number of specs as well. Like, pure DPS classes don't need 3 specs, but there would be hell to play. Whichever one you take away, people are going to moan. But they could add a spec. Like, I have no option with them adding Shockadin, a proper Shockadin spec, to Paladins to give us a ranged DPS option. That would be okay. I'd be okay with it. I'd still prefer the Retribution option, but I would be okay learning how to play my Paladin from ranged as long as they did that. The average stats Ret Paladin should have. The thing is, they're all really, really close together. If you sim yourself and you do a plot scaling, you will see that your secondaries follow very, very close together. Mastery is always a little bit behind, but if you leave it behind, it will start to creep up again. They're all really close. So there isn't a stat priority for that reason. Because let's say, if I were to say to you, oh, go haste and crit. Haste and, if you're going to have a stat priority, haste and crit are pretty good ones to have. But if you start loading and everything's got haste and crit on it that you're wearing, you'll actually find out that versatility and mastery will start to sim higher for you. So you always have to keep reevaluating it. 45% mastery. If you hadn't had the boost and enjoyed Legion, the new player experience would make me quit. Yeah, I don't blame. Yeah, I think it would me. I don't actually know what it must be like for a new player. Like, again, I'm starting a mage at the moment. But with this mage, what I'm going to do with this, I'm not messing about leveling up this mage properly. It's on, like, because I have 2 accounts, so I'm going to level it to begin with, because I quite like the Elwyn Forest quest anyway. I'm going to get it up to a certain point, after which I'm not going to queue up for dungeons. I'm going to get a character on my other accounts to fly it round the dungeons, boost it through them. I'll get myself to level 60. The reason I get myself to level 60 is because then if I get myself the professions, and I'll pay for a character boost, and then those professions get scaled up as well. So that saves me a lot of work on the professions. But if I wasn't bothered about the professions on them, I would just boost them straight away. Would I sacrifice the healing or tank spec for range spec? Well, I would, but they couldn't do that because other people wouldn't. Protection and Holy Paladins are very popular. That's one of the reasons why Retribution Paladins sometimes get it in the neck a bit. Because Blizzard's argument is Paladins are well represented in a raid, which they are. But they don't seem to understand, or they pretend not to understand, that if you're a Retribution Paladin, you see yourself... Like, you know, if you're a warrior, for example, I always say you can't see yourself as a Fury or an Arms warrior. You are whichever spec is best. You should learn both. Because you're a DPS warrior, and you have 2 specs. Whereas as a DPS Paladin, I have 1 spec. So I get to say that I'm just a Retribution Paladin. Whereas if I had a second DPS spec, I would absolutely feel that I should learn how to play that spec properly as well. Oh yeah, everything's expensive. Yeah, I mean, there's several classes like that now. It's not just Retribution Paladin. You've got... The thing is with Shadow Priest, though, is Blizzard can't say that priests are well represented in the raid. You know, Shadow Priests, like in our roster, Shadow Priests are the only priests we've got. And even in a roster that has a healing priest, that's probably all they've got, a healing priest. So they're not as well represented. Same with monks. Monks have got the same issue because they've just got 1 DPS spec. But only so many guilds have Brewmaster and Mistweaver because they're not well represented specs. So Windwalker monks can actually kick up much more of a fuss about, you know, not being all that great themselves because monks in general are not well represented in a raid. But paladins are, so we never allowed to be brilliant. What do I think about balanced druids learning to play fell druids or vice versa? I don't think they should have to, because there is a difference between melee and ranged. They are 2 different roles. You know, like if so I'm a Retribution Paladin, I've learned how to do fights as Retribution Paladin. If I was to suddenly be told I have to play warrior or something like that, all I'd have to do is learn how to play the warrior. I wouldn't have to learn how to do those fights because it's the same as for Retribution Paladin with a small number of exceptions. But between melee and ranged is a very different experience. So it is accepted, it's not just by me, it is generally accepted that enhancement shamers, if they're like they've recently been having a tough time, it's not reasonable to say to them, well, just play elemental then. Whereas if, let's say, arcane mages were not doing very well recently, which I think is the case, it is reasonable to say to them, well, play Frost, because that's best, that's what you should be playing. Same with warlocks that in Nighthold build themselves as demonology warlocks. Demonology warlocks were 100% DPS whores. The reason they would play demonology is because it was very bad at switching target. So they got to say, oh, there's ads there, all range switch to them. Oh, no, I don't do much damage to them. I know I'd better just carry on doing what I'm doing and doing loads of damage. Whereas in reality, they should have been told, no, Affliction is best for most of these bosses. That's what you should be playing. Would WoW ever reach a point where all classes can tank and heal and DPS like in Rift? No. I think if they're going to stick to this size of this 20 raid size, they should actually restrict the number of specs that there are rather than expand them. They should massively restrict it. But with certain classes, they're screwed. Paladins have to be able to DPS, heal and tank. It's just part of the archetype that's in there now. Same with druids. You can't take that. And you know. It's the thing is that this is Blizzard's own fault. It's the new classes that caused all these problems. All of the new classes had a melee DPS spec and had a tanking spec. One of them had a healing spec as well. But it's the tanking it's the fact that so you've now got an excessive number of melee and tanking classes where there's limited room for them in raids, has caused all of these problems. So you have to be better than average at playing your class or spec compared to someone in a much more, you know, in like a ranged class, say. It is a shame support specs won't be a thing. I'd be absolutely fine being a support class as Paladin. It fits. I'd be okay with that. A bit like in Lord of the Rings Online, the Captain. The Captain class was a pretty good class. Although in the end, I actually ended up maining a champion. But after that, I probably would have gone for Captain. Would you use the legendary chest over the belt or cloak in Mythic Plus? For Rets, yes, you would. Legendary chest, if I had that, if I get that tomorrow, I'm wearing that in Mythic Plus. The only, well, actually, it depends on set bonuses. Because when we had to put on the spreadsheet which tier sets, like the 4 we want most, I put chest as one of the 4. Which means that if I did get the legendary chest as well, I'd be a bit stuck. Unless I happen to coin one of the other pieces. But the legendary chest, absolutely for Mythic Plus, yeah, definitely. Probably instead of the belt. You know, I don't use Crusade. It depends. If you're not using Crusade off cooldown, the belt is not as useful. Except maybe on Tyrannical for bosses. Depends on the... You have to... I mean, that's the thing with legendaries. You shouldn't really think for any class or spec, oh, these are my 2 best legendaries. For Mythic Plus especially, you should be thinking in terms of, well, sort of, is it? You know, like if I'd have pushed to a higher key this week with Quaking and Bursting, I'd have been using my defensive legendaries. Because, you know, danger of death would have been a far more serious problem than doing DPS, because DPS is actually what causes you to get yourself into these problems anyway. I suppose the higher up the Mythic key, the less likely that is to happen, because it'll take you naturally a longer time to kill trash anyway. But if you kill like a load of trash and get your bursting stacks, and then before they've worn off, another one sort of dies from dot or something, then you just end up extending it. So an interesting thread on Warcraft lore where people said that the class fantasy streamlined a lot of the lore and ruined the differences races had with the classes. So, for example, how troll priests had different quest texts and lore. Oh yeah. Well, there was a situation, like particularly for priests in vanilla, when the different races had different spells. So, I mean, the most famous one was Dwarf Priest used to get Fear Ward. That was their thing. Night Elves got some, like, spell, like, offensive spell. I can't remember what all of them got. But they did all have a special spell that was just for them for that race. Now, you can argue that's much more from the old... See, there's an old school style of role-playing game like that. I think in modern role-playing games, and particularly I think it's important for World of Warcraft, I think they should remove racial bonuses. Maybe have them as cosmetic things. Like, for example, the diplomacy trait for humans, where you get 10% extra rep. Something like that. Okay, it's sort of useful for min-max at the start of an expansion. But generally speaking, it's not impactful. So if they had things like that, maybe dwarfs got extra gold when they looted mobs. You know, or goblins, or, you know, something like that might make more sense for goblins. Those sorts of things. Or dwarfs, like dwarfs used to have a racial where they could see chests on their minimap. Maybe they should get that back. You know, because chests are now back in the game, treasure and stuff like that. Maybe that should just be their racial, that they get that. And yeah, okay, when we've all got those things that allow us to see them anyway, it becomes useless. But again, it's one of those things that maybe is useful at the start of an expansion. But for racials, I would stop them being useful in raids, because it's a massive problem. Even the perception that one faction is better than the other is just adding to this imbalance we have. The pseudo-Viking warrior lore. I don't know. I don't really have any firm sort of views on that, really. Will WoW continue when it kills all its subs or it transfer? I don't think WoW will be allowed to limp on. At the point... See, it's not just... Like, for a lot of MMOs, they keep rumbling on, even though they're not making a huge amount of money. It's surprising how little money an MMO has to make to keep itself going. Like Lord of the Rings Online is absolutely classic. That can have surely no more than 100,000 players now. Really, it seems pathetic to me. It cannot have much of an audience, but it's still going and it still does new content. I mean, presumably the fact that it's not that popular means that that's why they've never updated it. That really needs update. If I were to play Lord of the Rings Online again, it would only be if it had a huge update. You know, if I were them, if they could get the money together, I would just scrap it and start again, wouldn't you? With a better engine and just, you know, just make it better. But WoW won't ever do that. They will make another one. They will just make another one if it starts to seriously diminish. But the thing is, it's not, because people keep saying, because we now don't know how many subscribers there are, and for good reason. I don't blame Blizzard for that. But you know, it's certainly not gone lower than it was in WoD. So there must be round about, well, 5 million, let's say, just for the sake of argument, 5 million active subs, especially round about new content time. And it might be a bit more than that. That is way less than at its peak, but it is still way more than competition. So in terms of the money it's bringing in, they only spend a few % on development. The rest of it's just pure profit. So when they said they doubled the team for like Legion, they just doubled the number of developers they had working on it. It's not a massive outlay of money. They've not cut massively into their profits to do that because they spend so little on it proportionally in terms of what they generate. Yeah, it's not just subs exactly. I mean, that's why I think it's fair enough that they don't have to report the number of subs, because the reason they report at all, they're not reporting to us, they're reporting to their shareholders. I know some players could also be shareholders. All shareholders want to know is what their dividend's going to be. So they want to know what the financial state of the company is. So for that, they can just talk about how much money it's making, and that's fair enough. Yeah, it makes a huge amount of money, this game. And it is only one game in their stable. And they have other, I mean, you know, Overwatch is making them an absolute mint at the moment as well. You know, the shareholders are getting a hell of a dividend this year because, as was noted, I was reading some financial news last year and they were noting that all the chickens are coming home to roost this year because the main development resources have already been spent on Legion because most of it goes into the actual launch. Obviously, it continues throughout. So they're just reaping the benefits this year from like Overwatch and Legion and stuff like that because most of the work for it has been done. So it will be making a huge profit this year. Absolutely massive. I've never really played Starcraft 2. I'm not into sci-fi games. Like if you put an RTS into a fantasy type situation, or even like the closest I've ever played and enjoyed is Civilization. I quite like playing Civilization. I mean, that's sort of neither fantasy nor sci-fi, really, is it? It sometimes seems sort of sci-fi when you've got someone charging at you with elephants and you've got like, you know, machine guns. Because they haven't done very well. A spoiled sample from an emissary cache. What does it say on the text? My first thought would be it's an item that does not belong in this patch. Because that's usually what they do. If there's an item that would come from it that's been removed from the loot table, then it appears as a grade sort of trash item. Oh, okay, well, it could be that then. There you go. They know that. Well, you best go to Dalaran then. Well, yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is why I was panicking, thinking I wasn't going to get my +10 Mythic done today, because I thought to myself, oh shit, everyone's going to be watching people streaming the raid, which they sort of were. I was very lucky in the end to get a group. Because, I mean, this is the thing. People want to watch. I mean, the only videos I've been able to watch so far are people from PTR, but they haven't been killing those bosses. And even if they were, Blizzard could have changed things. This is as it is live. So people want to watch how it's going to be like for when they're doing it themselves. On top of the people who will never do it themselves and just want to watch the streaming of it anyway. But, yeah, the Kill Jaden one, I don't know how that's going to work. We'll have to see. That will be the really tough one. I suppose for normal and heroic, just like usual, we'll probably be able to blunder our way through most of them. You know, because, I mean, I've been reading through, as I say, the guides on them, and you look at some of them and think, oh, I can't remember all this. But then most of the abilities you'll just get to, they'll either be obvious anyway, or you'll just get to ignore them, and it won't really do any damage to you if you do ignore them. You just, you know, but then when it gets to Kill Jaden, that'll be a different matter. The Holy Pally Artifact. Yeah, I mean, that is a difficulty for me, because I still like the shield thing. I mean, obviously, you can. I've transmogged all of my artifacts now, including the Holy Paladin one. But yeah, you can't. I don't think you can transmog into Mace and Shield. I think you can only transmog the Mace because it doesn't class as a main and an off weapon. Do I see the Judgment going away when they rework the spec in the next expansion? I don't expect them to make massive changes to the specs. Or going from what they said. They tend not to make massive changes in consecutive expansions these days. It tends to be a big rewrite one expansion, and that sort of... It's changed a bit, but not massively. So I don't expect them to go away in the next expansion now. It might, but I don't expect it. Yeah, well, before Wrath, of course, item level, you weren't even aware of it. You just had stats on your gear to try and work out what was better, without any real idea what those stats were a lot of the time. Why? Well, this is the thing I've sort of said before. Like with other games, when they bring out an expansion, that a lot of games don't change the classes at all. They might tweak it a bit of balancing, but they don't really change it. Blizzard have this thing about changing the game, and I'm not going to say it's a silly thing to do, because it's very difficult when they're as successful as they are. It has to be down to something. They could always say it was down to that. But yeah, there's plenty of other MMOs when expansions come out. Like in Star Wars: The Old Republic, I think they've had a major class retuning, like revamp, once, I think. Lord of the Rings Online, I don't think they ever have. I just think they change it up because people like to see themselves getting new abilities. I think they just identify that as something people get excited about. How's the new class going to play? People just expect it now. Well, the thing is, Blizzard are really restrictive with Transmog. It's like they don't like it at all. So I don't think they'll introduce dies. They really don't. Like, Transmog is the most pathetic costume customization in any MMO that has it that I have played. Yeah, well, you don't want to be overpowered. There's no fun in being overpowered. Well, they may well largely leave the specs alone anyway. Obviously, they have to do a couple of things. they will, because obviously we're going to lose our artifact traits. Now, there'll have to be something to replace that. Obviously, it's not going to be on the weapon. But the artifact power system, I'm sure they will consider as a success because it's done what they wanted it to. So they will, that will be back surely in the game in some form. But I don't know in what form. What could they change about Transmog? They could change it so that we could actually have costumes that you can put as a separate skin. Like in Lord of the Rings Online, as I say, that's got the best transmog system effectively that I have ever seen. Because like on my champion, which is a heavy armor wearing character, so a plate wearing character you would say in this game, whereas one of my transmogs for that is basically looking like a ranger in like a hood and cloak and stuff like that with a bow on his back. Well, he uses a bow, that's fine. Another one is like furs for when you're in like Misty Mountains type territory. And stuff like that, and you don't have to go onto a mount or anything like that. You've got wardrobe slots, and you create your different things, and you can just click between them at the press of a button. So when you go from one terrain to another, you can say, "Oh, I want to change my clothes," and you click on it. So that would be better. Elder Scrolls Online is okay, but that's not brilliant either because it's set costumes. You can't go, oh, the helm from that and the boots from that and stuff like that. It's set costumes. But you do get to dye them. So you get dye stations, at least. And there's a range of things you can wear. So you can still be in heavy armour, and you can be wearing like a suit. If you wanted to wear a suit while you're out roughing it in the wild. Transmog is good, but it would be better if they would just open it out more in terms of the style of things you could wear. Because then they could make... like they have a small amount of pure costume gear. It's pathetic. They should massively expand it, and then you could give that for rewards for because people keep saying, oh, it's a gear based game, World of Warcraft. It's not. It's like any role playing game. It's a character development game, and the way your character looks is as important a part of development as how powerful it is for a lot of players. I mean, obviously not if you're into if you're a raider or into Mythic Plus and stuff like that. But for a lot of casual players, the way your character looks is at least as important as how many, how hard it can hit things over the head. Character creations options are negligible in Lord of the Rings Online. In WoW. They are absolutely negligible. It is embarrassing when you play any other game just how much customization you can give it. What's that? Leveling seems such a lot of work for a day or so at the start of an expansion. That's only if you're rushing it. I mean, I have to sort of rush it a bit, but I am naturally slowed down by work. It is quite incredible that I effectively have a quarter of the year off as a teacher, when if an expansion came out during that quarter of a year, I could level all day and do it in a day. They never have done that. They have never brought out an expansion during that period of time. It's like they must be doing it on purpose. I don't know how they miss my holidays every time. In fact, this time with Legion, they, and I mean quite literally, brought out the expansion as soon as I went back. So I'd had like nearly 8 weeks off. The last day of my holidays when they brought it out. Like that night, so I couldn't even spend that day doing it. I was at work on the first full day of the release. But that's only for people who are rushing it. And yet, okay, if you're in a serious raiding guild, you have to rush it. I understand that. But that's not for the majority of people. Majority of people don't feel that rush. Why get rid of Realm first? Because they're largely pointless. Because if you're on the same realm as Method, you ain't getting Realm first. Whereas if you're on some pokey little realm, then you can get Realm first and be World 500. It seemed a bit silly. Oh, what you mean for like professions and stuff and leveling? Well, again, it was a bit silly. I mean, getting Realm first was just... all you needed to do, realistically, was potentially be on a realm where there's not a lot of tryhards. And also plan what you were going to do. And you could do that by doing a load of beta testing if you were able to get into the beta. And no life it, basically not go to bed. There's no skill as such involved. You know, there's planning it. I mean, there is a little bit. But it's not anything really to be proud of. It just meant you didn't sleep. And you knew the best way to level up. And as I say, on some realms, there wouldn't, if there was no one else trying to do it, then you would get it anyway. Add multiple costume sets as rewards with each seasonal event. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I do think they should massively expand the costumes, but only if they completely rethink Transmog. Like, I don't see what the problem is in a plate wearer wearing what appears to be cloth robes. That shouldn't be an issue. I don't see the issue with that. It's like Blizzard are trying to control too much what we look like. They're trying to retain that control. It's like, I really don't think they wanted to put Transmog in the game. I think it was probably something they felt compelled to do as a way, because people have always complained about the poor customization of characters in this game. It's a bit like throwing us a bone, but they didn't really want to do it. Blizzard didn't take it away unless you cheated. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think sometimes they underestimate how much interest there is in cosmetic rewards. You know, people are up for cosmetic rewards. Cosmetic rewards last forever anyway. That's another thing. Like, everyone knows that the gear you're getting... I mean, the gear I've now got in from Mythic Nighthold is, in a few weeks' time, going to be largely replaced, I hope, with, like, heroic gear from Tomb of Sargeras. So, or even some normal gear, because it's roughly the same item level. So, it lasts a few months and then you get rid of it. Whereas cosmetic gear lasts forever. Dance thing. Oh, you mean the auction house dance party? Yeah, that does seem a bit funny. Like, you don't even seem to get anything from it. But as the guard points out, if you try and use the auction house there is another auction house in the city. I'm not entirely sure where in Orgrimmar, actually. I only know of one auction house there. But there must be more than one, because there's more than one in Stormwind. And it will be the same for Orgrimmar. But anyway, I'll do the usual thing now, wind it down a little bit. It's been over 2 hours, so we'll give the next sort of few minutes, see if anyone wants to throw anything else into the ring, and then we'll sort of call it a draw there. I will be streaming the raid tomorrow, so I don't know how that will go, though. But it will be the usual thing. It is a bit weird streaming the raids, because I have two options. I can cut the Discord sound out so you don't hear the rest of the raid. That is useful if I'm trying to, if someone asks a question and I'm trying to answer it, because then you haven't got other people in the background drowning me out. The downside to it is, like what happened last Wednesday, is for first 20 minutes of the raid, we didn't pull a boss, because we were, you know, the raid leader was actually explaining some things about this week to the raid. So it was just me jumping in front of Scorpion. So I sort of felt compelled later on to turn the Discord back on. But, yeah. So, but I'll probably have it off tomorrow, just because... but then, because it's new bosses, there'll be a lot of standing around and not really seeing anything. But there you go. Maybe it's nostalgia speaking, but a lot of the leveling dungeon gear feels more bland nowadays compared to before. I think... I don't know. It depends when you mean, because... like in vanilla, it would last you a lot longer. You would, after getting level cap, still be going back to doing dungeons for a long time after. Whereas after that, you sort of felt that you were only going to be using it for a few weeks if you were a raider. Whereas I think now, there's again much more that feeling that it can last you a bit, because it can Titanforge, maybe. So I don't know. Do I think there'll ever be legendary weapon drops again? They will change again at some point. They'll change their legendary strategy again at some point. So possibly. Why spend resources on content like auction house dancing? I strongly suspect it didn't cost very many resources to do that. I strongly suspect it didn't take that much time to do that content. Someone just came up with an idea and probably did it on their own. So I think some content doesn't take that many resources. I don't think they would have spent a lot of resources on it because it's stupid content. I think it's a joke from the Wrath Dance Studio meme thing. My opinion on Preacher's latest video about Concordance. I haven't seen it. Didn't even know he'd done one. Why? What does he say about Concordance? Well, I'll read the next question. What do you make of the complaints that Legion feels like World of Diablo craft? Well, yeah, what it is, I've played Diablo 3 a bit. Largely, it's related to, first of all, they brought in a number of things directly from Diablo. Like Paladins, for example. There's a lot of abilities we've got that are basically the Templar abilities. Okay. But then the legendaries, the way it works, like in Diablo, you just get legendaries like sweets. You get them frequently. Like the first time I ever played that and got legendaries, it's like, oh my god, wow, is this really rare? It's like, no, it's not really rare. You are supposed to get lots of legendaries. You basically kit yourself out in full legendaries. So that's why it's called like that. And the reason why people are moaning about it is not because things have been taken from Diablo. Like, we've never had it in years. Blizzard have been taking good ideas from other MMOs that have been made by other studios. Why shouldn't they take ideas from their own games as well? They should if they're good. The issue is that not a lot of people like the new legendary system. So I think that's what the issue is. Good night. Do I like the Pally speed buff mount? No, I don't. I wasn't keen on the sword thing either. That was going to be a nightmare to use. I know some people saw it as a movement thing. The fact of the matter is the way it was working, it had DPS potential, but fiddly DPS potential. So I wouldn't have liked the sword of, well, it was called Turalian's Might eventually. It was called Lothar's Might to begin with, wasn't it? And then someone pointed out that Lothar was much more like a warrior. Well, he wasn't a paladin anyway. But yeah, I did get to have a go at that. What did I like ever? I like most of the things about it. I just don't like getting up on a mount when I need to do movement speed boost. Because I get stuck on things. And I'm not even a Draenei. Draenei have it worse. I don't like lots of legendaries. And I don't like fiddliness. Fiddly is for warlocks. Warlocks are fiddly. Warriors actually used to be fiddly as well. They've had a lot of their buttons taken. They've still got quite a lot of buttons actually. Do I think they will nerf the level 101 boosting? What do you mean? Hang on. Level. What do you mean boosting? Which I don't know what it means next. Level 101 boosting. Good night, my love. Oh, all right. Okay, I know what you mean now. Things like that obviously are against the spirit of the game, and anything that's against the spirit of the game, they will inevitably want to put a stop to if they sensibly can. Sometimes they know that to do so puts, like, especially if it's not a huge problem, if the solution would actually hurt more people than it is intended to sort of help, then that's, I mean, that's why we have split runs now. No one likes doing split runs. No one. Not the min-maxers, not people lower down. Blizzard don't want it either. It's just they can't think of a elegant solution to prevent it without, you know, making the situation even worse for players. And it might well be the same here. It's the sort of thing I'm sure they would be thinking about, yes. But whether they can actively stop it is another matter, given the way gear is working at the moment in World of Warcraft. I mean, it's one of the issues with scaling, isn't it? It's just... Scaling is a really good thing on balance, because it means you can have people at different levels all doing that sort of content. But yeah, you do so. So that it might well be that it's not a straightforward thing to deal with. If it was a straightforward thing to deal with, they would have dealt with it now, wouldn't they? Well, yeah, I mean, I soloed normals now. If I've got like some of my alts when they've had profession, the first time I did it was for my monk who's an alchemist, and I needed to do the quest in Vault of the Wardens. But unfortunately, it involves doing something that requires the cooperation of your group. It's not just kill a boss you were going to kill anyway and loot something. So that didn't work in a group because they were not inclined to hang about. So I then soloed it with my Paladin, because it was a different account anyway. And then found it's actually quite easy when you've got a lot of gear and you're a Paladin to solo normal mode dungeons. A 100% dodge, yeah. Well, this is what it's like when you do really old content, like old raids now, isn't it? If you've got a little bit of leech, you're basically unkillable. Well, you are unkillable. So always keep hold of a piece of gear, even if it's low item level, with leech on it, because then you can use that for running old raids. I've not really noticed it because I don't, as I say, I don't, and the same thing will happen with the next Altai level as well. I won't actually do normal dungeons in groups. I will do, you know, when I need to do them for the quests, I will just use my Paladin, or depends on which account it's on, or another high level character to boost them through it in all likelihood. Because it's quicker. Because I don't have to wait in a queue, and I can go through a dungeon more quickly on my Paladin than a whole group of appropriate level people, shall we say, can do it. I've not actually come across the twink ones, but I don't know how annoying it is though. I mean, because you're going to do the dungeons at like Mythic plus anyway, where certainly no one's going to be blasting through it then. Unless I suppose it's the base Mythic and you've again got people who are wanting to do it for some other reason. I mean, it is sometimes useful to do a normal Mythic plus 0, especially in the week when or the days when the Mage Tower gives you the potentially extra token from doing dungeons. Yeah, mages are quite useful for the lower level dungeons because not only can they blast through them quite quickly, but you can also teleport them all over the world quite quickly as well. So it's a much quicker process. The only downside is they're not very good at resin if they allow your character to die. I've not noticed, oh, maybe it says realm thing. I've not really noticed it, but I don't read trade chat too much anyway. A lot of the times when I'm online, I'm not actually looking at the screen. I'm usually like tabbed out and doing something else. So I don't know, but I haven't noticed any in trade chat on my realm. We used to get a lot of, in chat, people offering boosting services for dungeons earlier on in Legion. More so than now. But anyway, I think I'm going to call it to a draw there. We're about 2 hours, 20 minutes in now. And I probably should go and have a shower as well. It's getting hot again now. Quite how it gets hotter later on in the evening, I have no idea. Have I watched the cinematic Kill Jane Kill? No, I haven't. But if it's out, I'm sure I will. Although I will be seeing it tomorrow as well. I've not noticed a lot of gold simmer spam anyway. But anyway, thanks for coming. And as I say, I will be streaming our race tomorrow, but I don't know how much of a spectacle that will be, because there'll probably a lot of sitting around and wondering why we died again. But anyway, I'll see you later. Good night. And good luck all to you in terms of Sargeras as well.